2014, we didn't have any idea at all what we were going to do with the blue cabin, or if we were going to do anything at all.
In fact, we weren't going to do anything except try to save it, correct?
Yes, I mean, that was the first thing was about, well, I mean, maybe that's the story we tell, is that I was, at the time, I'm fairly close to Al and Carol. Al had just broken his hip in June. At the same time that the Port Metro had decided the shipbuilding yard next door was actually sold to Polygon. And the cabin had been saved all its life, with the only reason it wasn't razed when, in the 50s when everything else in Kate's Park was razed, or in the 70s when the mudflats 2 miles away was all burnt out, was that it had a connection to this shipbuilding yard. And what we know about that was in 1932, the person who built the cabin moved it onto the foreshore there so he could work for Mackenzie Barge. And so that was the beginning of the story. But suddenly, once he put it there, it essentially went into no man's land. Nobody owned it. Nobody knew it. And that was the whole thing about it. So they kept sending these threatening letters to Al and Carol, telling them if they didn't remove this cabin within 3 weeks, they were going to remove it and charge them a fortune.
So they wanted them to remove it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
neat, yeah.
And, you know, I mean, Al was having his hip replaced, they had other things on their mind. So Carol asked me if I would talk to Port Metro. So I kept phoning Port Metro up and saying, well, they don't really own this, and they, you know, it's not really their cabin. And then by then, the person who had rented them from Mackenzie Barge had long gone and the son was there. And as far as the son was concerned, Al did own it. So and this is maybe the greatest thing about this project, or the thing that kind of thrills all of us, is the fact that this made it into the 21st century without a chain of ownership. Like essentially there is nothing there for anybody to claim it. And I mean, we have it now in Maplewood Farm, but I'm writing all these capital grants and they say, well, do you have a 10-year lease or do you have a deed? It's like, well, sorry here, folks. So, you know, so we have it, but kind of as salvage.
Yeah, I think that's where we got to, right?
Yeah.
It's been claimed as a piece of, well, salvaged material, right?
But we didn't know what we wanted to do with it. The problem was, the piece of land it was on wasn't really a piece of land. It was pretty much a slaggy. And so it was all kinds of toxic metals on top of each other that he just put this on top of. And that's what they needed to get rid of. It wasn't, the cabin was just in the way for them getting rid of these toxic chemicals, or toxic metals and stuff. So
I think in the way that we first got together, we got together as individuals. So
yeah,
we got together as 3 people for different reasons, thought that this cabin was worth saving. And then after we started working together for a while, all 3 of us brought in our organizations that we're respectively affiliated with. So Esther bringing in C3, me bringing in other sites, and Glenn, of course, bringing Grunt on board. And to some degree, our mandates supported that, or in other cases, it was a bit of a stretch, but we managed to kind of make that happen.
So I think actually the first couple of months when Carol and Al were getting the eviction notices, Glenn and I were there trying to figure out, essentially we actually thought that we could save the cabin in place, right? So I think we spent a couple of months with this very unrealistic notion that we were going to save this cabin and it was going to remain. So the battle really kind of started there, where we did buy into, and you know, Carol was a very strong force, and Carol believed that no, this cabin was going to remain here, and we believed that as strongly as she did. And I think we went for a couple of months with that, you know, very unrealistic notion. And at some point, I don't know when exactly, I mean, then you came into the picture, and I don't know exactly when we realized that, no, this was no longer going to happen, and that we needed to,
Probably the third letter of eviction
yeah,
from
exactly.
the.
We needed to do a reset. And I think in doing the reset, we realized, okay, we need to save this cabin. And we had no idea as to what in the world we would do with the cabin once we saved it. We just knew we had to save it. And in doing that, we started to get, I think, through the media that we all generated, we started to get a lot of.
Well, you.
Yeah, well, we started to get a lot of proposals about where this cabin could go, and what could happen to the cabin. I think the most important thing that I think we all agreed upon, and I think we've been very, very emphatic about, was that we did not want to see this destroyed. And we didn't know what we were going to do with it, but we didn't want it destroyed. And so we had lots of proposals in terms of it being repurposed, bits and pieces of it, the facade being kept and put in a museum, somebody taking it, making art out of it, doing some assemblage work with it. We had a lot of different kind of proposals coming at us, and I think we were very strong about the fact that we wanted to keep this intact. Where we were going to take that and what we were going to do with a cabin that nobody owned, we had no idea. So,
But actually, it was an email from Glenn that said that he had this vision of putting it on a barge.
Well, we talked about a residency, and then quickly after we moved it, because there was a whole process of moving it and trying to get some kind of break from Port Metro. And Carol and Al, as Carol was, they were really secretive about them living there. I mean, except for that picture of Al that's on the cover of the Grunt magazine, there was no pictures of the blue cabin. They didn't want people out there. It was pretty much to themselves. I mean, the only person, Kristen was there quite a bit, but there were, I was there 2 or 3 times with them, but it wasn't a place where there were a lot. Yeah, but it was, and so,
yeah,
very close friends, and then not, I think most of the time they spent there alone. And so they were kind of reluctant when it became realizing that we had to do something. We realized we had to go to the press, but Carol was kind of really reluctant for us to go to the press because she didn't want people to know it was there, and with good reason in the end. But I mean, there was no other way to save it. So, I mean, what was amazing then was how fast the media picked up on this, and what that brought in terms of, every day there were 2 or 3 emails from somebody saying, we can put it up in Port Potlatch or Fort Camp Potlatch up in Indiana, or a guy in Squamish said he had a place by the river, he'd take it, and it was just like, what do you do with this thing? And then came the point where we figured out, of course we had our angel, thank God it was Polygon doing this and not BOSA, because Michael Alteen was really supportive of the whole thing, and he was willing to give us a hand. And he actually, him and Polygon paid the $12,000 for the mover to move it.
And also what you can't see, I don't think we have in any of the, maybe I have some, but they're not here, but the visual in terms of the shipyards, it was quite a steep slope. And so to move it out, they actually had to build a special road. So just to move the cabin cost $12,000. But to build this special road to hoist the cabin, probably about 30. So, and I think, Glenn hit the nail on the head when he talks about angels. I think all along the way we've picked up a lot of them. We have like Marco and Michael. I know you'll hear about them all as we get through this, but we've picked up a lot of people who have been very generous with their time, expertise, and resources. But Polygon went beyond just the actual moving of the cabin, and we met with, and I always say this wrong because it's Supreme Movers and not Superior, right?
Yeah, Supreme.
So this guy Peter, we know nothing about moving a building, right? And so
less than nothing.
Yeah. So I went out there on a rainy day with this guy Peter from Supreme Movers, who unfortunately is no longer with us. And he comes out there and he's like, "Where is this?" "Just follow me down the trail, this way, hang left, whatever." Anyway, we get down there and he's sort of like a burly guy and he's sort of like, he looks at me and I go, well, can you move it? And he goes, yeah, I think I can. Yeah. Let me just kind of look at it. He goes over and he does the guy thing, you know, he kicks it a couple of times. I'm like, okay, I guess this can happen. And we weren't sure because we weren't sure how strong the cabin was. We did know that it had been up there for, I don't know, 80, 100 years.
And we did have the city of North Van had done some assessments on it, and one was an engineering assessment, saying that it wouldn't stand being moved, that it would fall apart as soon as you put it on a crane, which didn't prove out to be true. There was a lot of things that said didn't prove out to be true. But I mean, it was it was a day moving it. The ridiculous thing then is after getting, by this time, maybe 7 letters of eviction from the port, we said, okay, we have the money, we can build the road, we can move it. And they said, oh, wait a minute, not yet. And it was like, we have to give you a permit to move it. And I said, so when do we get this permit? It took them 3 months to give us a permit. And mostly because,
you can't say almost the one before that.
Okay, one of these pictures will show there's a bush on the other side of the cabin. And we would have had to, it's not a tree, it's a bush.
It's a bush.
And we would have had to take out that tree to move it. And they said, oh no, we need an environmental assessment on this tree. And it's like, wait a minute, you're gonna raise this whole thing like 8 feet of all this metal it's sitting on. Why do you need we need an environmental assessment. So it got into this, then you were all of a sudden into this level of ridiculousness that finally broke. The other part of this is we had this really great guy working for us named Michael Jackson, who came in as a volunteer, another one of our angels. He was a project
and another kind of person that's not necessarily connected to the arts and very good at what they do.
And they were like, this is a 70-page plan. Like, it's a pretty extensive thing that he gave us in this thing.
And then Bush Bowman came on to do an engineering assessment.
An engineering assessment. So we got all this kind of high level, and I mean, even if we could found the money to hire a heritage planner, we wouldn't have been able to hire him. So, I mean, and it was the report that gave us the vision, because it was really, the report was kind of saying, well, do as little as you can in remediating this cabin. Like, don't try to update it, or just leave it.
And don't go for heritage classification.
And don't go for clear classification and all that. So that became the idea of, because we had talked about a residency, but there was no idea of how a residency would work. I mean, the other thing is the cabin doesn't have water, and the only electricity was, an extension cord from the shipping building here that had been used for 40 years. And so there's.
So we should say too that where it went initially, so the site, probably a year or more. And it was really, we only had to move it really 5 kilometers west down the road. We got a really kind offer from a chemical plant called Connexus that are quite connected to all of the economies along the forefront of the North Shore. And it being stored in this empty lot, I think that was another kind of way for us to understand those economies, in that we had to, Michael, who's the project manager, had to take a chemical safety course in case there was some kind of disaster, that anybody who was visiting the cabin could then be escorted to a place of safety through
You couldn't go on site without a gas mask.
So there's a lot of, just starting to understand the level of movement of goods in and out of the harbor. Was really starting.
And Connexus made a whole pile of nasty chemicals all out of salt.
Right.
Everything they made was from salt.
Right.
So it was a.
Yeah.
Why were you told not to vote for heritage classification? What was the?
Because of the complexity of what that would entail, and.
No, because it didn't have a site. But once we moved it, there was no point to the.
Heritage is really tied to
Yes, it really
the
has to
situation.
fit, yeah.
But I mean, the reason, the thing that we did right was trying to get at Park Metro. We found out somebody had told us about, this is how we ran into Connexus. somebody had told us about the Citizens Committee of the Port. And so there's a Citizens Committee of the Port that
Believe
has
it or not.
a bunch of businesses and also some just citizens on it. I think the Swalowtooth are on it. Connexus was on it. So we contacted somebody there and said, we're interested in giving you a presentation. And so they're a committee that Portmanteau puts together. So when we went and gave the thing, they were our biggest fans. They thought this was a great idea. Jillian came up to you afterwards and offered to connect us a lot. We connected with this guy named Ian McMurdo, who was a maritime engineer, and he's given us a load of free advice through this whole process. It kind of changed the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Portmanteau couldn't really go against their own committee. And so that went on for like a year and a half. They would email us when they were having their next meeting to just get a report on where we were. They were really interested in it as it went forward. So that was a really...
I have to say that the Connexus site was a rather, for me, a very kind of despairing time because it's a very kind of desolate industrial environment. So in the middle of this industrial site sat this beautiful little blue cabin, a gem.
Looking very forlorn and out of place.
Exactly, very forlorn.
You actually
And
see it from the bridge.
you could, and every time we went to visit it, it was just, I don't know, I found it extremely depressing because it was just so difficult to see it out of the context, this beautiful location, that I think for some of you who attended the talk with Carol would have, seen, just, you couldn't get a more extraordinary, location. And to see it go from there
Yeah.
to this place that just had, concrete and these chemical plants, and there it was, just all by its little, so soft.
And you needed a gas mask to go visit it.
Yeah. But of course, extremely appreciative that we had somewhere to actually move it to, because if we didn't have that location, I don't know where it would have gone.
And we'd envisioned that actually that any kind of restoration or remediation would take place on that site. But in fact, Connexus got sold to a different company, and they didn't want to absorb any of the liability of anyone hurting themselves on their property. And so that spurred us to actually find a new location, yet another location
Hey, Carol.
for it. Carol?
So yeah,
Remediation.
yeah. So then they kept it for 2 years, which was really great. And but where were we in the story? Oh, figuring out the vision.
Yeah.
So it was around this thing that Hal had written about, not wanting to do much with the cabin, and that gave me the idea of putting it with a tiny house. The idea that it would be paired in a way, and that there would be somewhere that would be comfortable for the person to live in, but then we didn't have to plumb the cabin, we didn't have to, do anything but basic electricity and some baseboard heating. Really.
Yeah. So we had lots of conversations running parallel at this time.
Yeah.
And we're meeting, once a week, once every 2 weeks, and, sort of running around like chickens with our heads cut off because, writing grants for this and then for that, and we need this and we need that, and we need to find out, what kind of floating device to put it on, which we're still not absolutely 100% certain of, right? And where. So there's all these conversations that are happening. What kind of residency is this going to be, who's going to be on, and sometimes that conversation, often that conversation got lost because we've been really a lot of the time preoccupied with a lot of the technical and logistical aspects
Of which
of
there are
this,
many.
of which there were many, including the whole remediation, which I think having Jeremy and Suze involved was also another angel coming our way, or angels coming our way, because of the sensitivity that they brought to the project. If we had hired just somebody who was, from construction world and came in, a contractor is what I was looking for. If we had hired a contractor, they would have come in, they would have just torn the walls out and put some drywall, framed it, put some drywall up, and it would not have resulted in first of all, this incredible exhibit we have here, the documentation that went hand in hand with that. So we've been fortunate that we keep connecting with people who have a really interesting take on the
And this is,
cabins.
the fortunate part of this is, it wasn't only about moving cabins that we didn't have any idea. I mean, through this whole process, we're continually up against, regulations between a barge and a platform and a pontoons. And, one is a cargo, and one is a home, and one is a vehicle. And they all have different designations maritimely, they have different designations insurance-wise, they have different designations. That kept us going for 2 years. Like the complications of that, of just, we'd be on the verge of a decision, and then you read something else. It's like you find out another piece of information, go, okay, wait a minute, it's like.
I think, Marco came into this as a really big partner, Marco Simpson from other sites. So Marco helped us not only through, I think, prior to Jeremy and Sue's coming on board from his construction knowledge, both as an artist and an architect, but then also when it came to actually talking about jurisdictional issues. So going to Transport Canada to try to better understand what those designations are. And in some ways, when I was thinking about it today, it dates all the way back to Marco's Project Park, which started in 2001, where this vehicle-like sculpture, 2 different sculptures that operate in the parking lane of Ontario Street. The only way that we eventually was able to get that onto the street was through a designation of being a float. So we could finally insure it, and to be able to occupy and to kind of work within the municipality's parking regulations was as a float, because it was not self-propelled, it didn't have an engine, it had to be towed. And it was like a little parade when that happened. So it was a float. So just, dating all the way back to that kind of experience, but then I think also with other sites, our experience with Deadhead, a floating public art installation on a World War II barge and moving through different jurisdictions. Those things have always been super fascinating, I think, to other sites in terms of the kinds of works that we do in public space. So I think really the Blue Cabin kind of touched on a lot of those already existing interests for our organization anyway. But when we went to Transport Canada, that was relatively recently. There again, so wherever we moved, it seemed like, whether it was Deadhead operating in a gray zone in the waters outside of the Maritime Museum, to this project, and for what it was, the 2 men, lovely gentlemen who met with us, said that it was sort of in between. It was as slippery as it had always been in terms of what kind of a classification it could be. And right now it's somewhere in between being a vessel, a floating object, could be probably the best designation that would suit us would be a pleasure craft.
This project takes you some weird places.
Oh,
And
yes.
it has been that's been the story all the way through. It's these adventures around finding out more than you needed to know about a whole bunch of stuff. And just trying to get your head around it. It's like, and in the meantime, I'm writing grants for grant programs, of which this fits none of them. Okay, big time. And it's not just, do you have a deed, do you have a 10-year lease or a deed to the property? There is all kinds of questions where it doesn't fit. It's
And it doesn't fit within even one district.
No, well that's the thing, when we're really pushing the boundaries, and I know meeting with the city at one point, and they're going, well, it's gonna be in the city, right? And we're like, well, sort of, maybe.
part-time.
And I think actually, that's an interesting point. And we said, yeah, and she goes, oh, I don't think that we can support this. But by the end of the conversation, we said to her, think about it in this way, and it comes down to actually the grant we've been trying to, wrestle with in the last week or so, Glenn. A different approach to history and the way that you view it and how you present it. And I think what's happening here, and what happened in that particular moment, was that we said to her, well, think about how many people are going to connect to the history of what was on the foreshore in North Vancouver, that now is traveling and going to different places. And people are having a conversation about what that was over there, but now it's over here. And so she went, oh, that's interesting. I like that. And from there, that was really what I think sold a very conservative North Vancouver District Council, who gave us the first initial
$10,000.
$10,000 to
Which
kind
was
of-
amazing. That really helped us in our build to try to slowly build the fund. I mean, people like the idea, but, you know, I mean, funders are usually sticklers about how much you can fit in the program. And this fit in no program, so it was like, we learned to be very adept at the grant platform. We decided to go, in the end, with a concrete platform. Yeah, that took a lot of decisions, and now we're trying to figure out how big that platform has to be, and now we've kind of, it was small, and then it got bigger, and now it's getting smaller again. And we're also in negotiations with the city around where we can locate this in Falls Creek. And seeing they're already trying to get rid of squatters in Falls Creek, we kind of got opposite of where they're going in some ways again. So and to, you know, to put it in Falls Creek, how many was it, 7 or 9 departments of City Hall you have to deal with? So, of which again, in none of those departments does this fit anything that they do, right? So
we're thinking Falls Creek for the first 2 years to kind of establish it, and then in the meantime, be building those networks for other locations. Because the idea is that it's not only just going to be moored in relation to a shore, but rather a community that can also connect with it. So building those relationships takes time.
yeah. Yeah, and we're slowly doing that, but it's I mean, once construction is over, it will be good, because I mean, it's really gearing a lot of attention. And essentially, I mean, most of us are doing this off, the only real employee of it is Marlene. The rest of us are all kind of working off the edge of our desks. And so it's trying to move this forward is a lot of work in different directions at all once, so, yeah.
I was looking up again the jurisdictional issues for where it might go, and certainly the waterways are extremely complicated, and yet at the same time they're kind of easy too, in that there's a lot of holes where one could insert something like this that would be fitting, I think. But I was rereading this this little article that Kevin Griffin had written about Deadhead, of where it was more outside of the Maritime Museum, and he'd done a fair amount of research, and we'd also been talking about a conversation we had with the director at the museum. And if there was a low tide and if Deadhead had rested on the bottom, the seabed, then it was the city's jurisdiction. While floating, it was actually in between Port Metro and the city of Vancouver, because it was just off of Pitt's Point. So the city of Vancouver takes care of Falls Creek, even though it's actually provincial. But the municipality has kind of taken it over according to the statute that involves Vancouver's incorporation. And then the Port Metro, of course, is federal, and it manages much of the shorelines on the North Shore, and then where the longshore unions are on this side. But then there's holes and gaps. So all of that, I just think is so incredibly fascinating.
Minutia and way too much information.
Yeah. A lot of bureaucracy.
So, I mean, we're hoping to have this up and going starting next April, is our plan. Whether we can make that or not, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of things to work out in the meantime. But in some ways, I'm amazed we got this far.
Yeah, I think despite, oh, there it is, well, no, that was at the, yeah, I think that despite all odds, really, we've been fortunate to have gotten to this point, and I think now we can see that there's going to be an end, and that the next move is going to be actually onto a platform of some kind. And yeah, a pleasure. Yeah, and then hopefully we can start doing some programming and animate the space and give it another new lease on life.
Its role as a conduit for history, I don't think I realized off the bat, but as time goes on, you realize that there's so much, it resonates with so many people. I mean, I've never had a project that got this much media attention. I mean, it seems like every move is just, the media is all over us. We've been on the cover of the Sun 2 or 3 times. We've been on the North Shore News cover half a dozen times. And, you know.
Do you know why? Like, is it because a significant artist used this?
No, it's all kinds of stuff, you know. I mean, they found those posters under the floorboards, and I mean, you barely had. I don't even know how I don't think we sent out a press release about that, did we? We didn't. Somebody wrote about it from the North Shore, and then all of a sudden, all the other news agencies picked it up.
Yeah,
So that caused a huge, like, there was probably 8 or 9 articles just about that. So all these things would happen that would cause, you know, it just seems, and people love the idea, like that's the thing.
Which idea?
Just the idea of saving this cabin, that it's not going to be destroyed. You know, the support on the North Shore around the project is huge.
But why? That's what I want to know is why.
What,
Like, did they know it was there for the last?
it didn't, yeah, they didn't necessarily know it was there, but it connected them to a history. It is a conduit. It connected them to a history that's gone,
So
which
the
is the mud flats and the whole earlier Kate's Park squats. You know, the Malcolm Lowry, all that stuff. I mean, that's all history we all know, but it's not history we see. We read about it, but I mean, you know, this cabin is the last representation of that in the North Shore, and I think there's a lot of people in the North Shore who realize that.
So the last 4 years has kind of opened people's minds to thinking about 100 years? Is that what you're experiencing?
I think there's a real resonance to what it is that so many of us are experiencing right now in terms of affordability, and that the cabin really represented either, well, it was what it was, but it was also part of a larger community, I think, of similar kind of structures that were really there as a way to kind of be an alternative way of living. These were the working poor. I mean, this was where they could live. And here we are, in 2018, with facing similar kinds of situations where.
I mean, I think it speaks to it. It's got a lot of resonance to what's happening right now, how much heritage we're losing. But I mean, you know, the fact that this squatters cabin sat there from 1932, I mean, flies in the face of this idea that Vancouver is just now becoming an unaffordable city. For lots of people for most of the 20th century, Vancouver was a very unaffordable city. And I think just by putting it on a barge with a small house, and the small house represents the unaffordability of today, I think it makes that clear to everybody. And I think that's the resonance. The resonance is how much heritage we're losing. And, you know, I mean, when you take a shipbuilding yard that's been there for 100 years and put in a retirement home in its place, I mean, people feel that loss.
I'm curious as to the reaction you're getting as well as an artistic place, right? Because to me, I look at that and that's an artist studio. And there's a whole pile of issues about artist studios that we can talk about, but it's that creative production that took place in that cabin and in that area. So,
And I do think that that's another factor. I think, you know, Carol and Al and, you know, all of the art that the two of you produced in that particular location. I think that that's another factor. I think there's many different elements to it, and I think people are coming to it because of either one of those things that we just mentioned, the gentrification, the affordability or lack of affordability in the studio, the artist who inhabited this for, you know, close to 40 years, and the work that was produced there as a result of that. So I think it's a number of factors, and so we have people coming because of different reasons, and so it's really kind of, I think, broadened who is interested in this particular project, because we don't just sort of,
Yeah,
we don't see just the art crowd coming.
yeah.
To the events or being interested in this project. We have people who are interested in history, that people are interested in, the actual physical history of the cabin. So, yeah, I think a lot of different.
The maritime industrial history, that's
Yeah,
what it brings up, labor
yeah.
histories, like, there's so much around Vancouver is built on that foreshore. And now, with the way the port is pretty much inaccessible to most citizens, that waterfront is not, people don't relate it to the Vancouver to the waterfront. We're becoming like a leisure city that's, that is more related to the mountains. And so there's, well,
So it's good that it's a background.
yeah, so I think it brings up those histories, and the resonance is not in the arts community. I mean, yes, the arts community is interested, but there's way more people that are interested or not interested in art or its potential.
Yeah.
A couple points. First point is jazz. Al's art was improvisational.
Yeah.
What you've gone through is intensely improvisational. It's jazz, you could score what you did in retrospect, but you couldn't anticipate it. So I think Carol's art too falls in that category of improvisational art. So it is true to its subject in that way. I want to talk about the actual residency use of it. When I was an architecture student in Calgary, a guy called Michael Century at the Bath Center kept showing up at jazz concerts. We both did. And he found out I was an architecture student. He said, well, can you advise us? We're going to make this colony called the Leighton Art Colony at Bath Center, and we got a bunch of dud corporate architects on the list. Can you come and rip it apart? I said, sure. So we killed half the architects and invited people like Métis architect Douglas Cardinal and others, Ron Tom, to make the studio. I'm sure there's people in the room that have used Banff Center studios.
And the three of us have all kinds of ideas about how it should go, but the truth of the matter is, the process takes it where it goes. Like, as much as we might have an idea and say, oh, I think it should do this, I think it should do this, but no, it has to do this. It's the only way to do it. Like, so at a certain point, we can have all the opinions in the world, but they don't get you there. At a certain point, the demands of it. How we're going to fund it, I don't know. It's not really. I mean, we're very different organizations in terms of our age and that whole thing. I mean, Grunt is the only one that has a kind of an infrastructure, so we've taken on the capital funding part of this. But once we get into programming, the fact that we have an infrastructure doesn't help us because it's hard to get other money because we're already on operating grants from different levels of business.
I guess I want to just back up to the first part of your question about the design process, and Marco's really been wonderful in leading us through this, of trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of what this might be like to be on. So, it's not like just becoming one with the landscape that the little house sits on, but rather you have no idea. It might be stuck up against a bridge abutment for 6 months. Who knows? I mean, what are the views going to be? What's the situation going to be? And so we've been going through a massing exercise with Marco. So and also talking about public engagement. That's a really big piece. So if people come aboard, where will they sit? What will they be looking at? What facilities will they need? Do they need a toilet? Do they need an outdoor kitchen for events? So we're kind of going through all of that at this particular moment.
Yeah, and we have done a scan of different artists' residencies. I think, as Glenn said, on some level, we have to be really pragmatic. And it's, wherever we can secure, to some extent, the funding is definitely, a big consideration. But then we've had all kinds of conversations where, at times we kind of position the cabin, the float, the pleasure craft, somewhere out there in the water. And then we had to sort of look at the practical side of that. Does an artist want to be out there, and then they have to row back in to get their supplies. How long do they want to be out there and isolated? So we all have kind of like different notions of where this could go and what it could be. And then we sort of bring it back to, well, we have to moor it somewhere because, you know, a person's gonna have to get, the artist is gonna have to get some provisions, and they have to eat. And maybe recharge things, batteries, what have you. So, yeah, we've had a lot of varying ideas as to where we could take it and what it could be. Do they go out there for 6 months? Do they go out there for 6 weeks? So we've been all over the map on that, and it's really difficult to settle in on what those parameters are going to be in regards to the residency. And to some extent, I guess we're going to just, well, not completely make it up as we go along, but I think we're going to have to do a little bit of that, where maybe in the first year it's going to look, perhaps it's going to look differently than what it's going to look like in the second year, and as we start to kind of mature, it might look differently 3 or 4 years from now.
Adapt, I think it's the adaptation of it is, you know, there's no.
So you've looked at the logistics of anchoring and mooring it in different parts of the inner harbor and all the requirements, depending on what jurisdiction.
We've been looking at that, but yeah, no,
It's got to vary from place to place.
no, it varies from everything, and it's complicated, and it's.
Yeah.
But it's not even just jurisdiction, because I think, Barbara, as you pointed out at one point, you said, well, if we moor it out here, and then it's like, well, the shadow that this casts over that particular area of water, and so you can only keep it there for a certain period of time before you start to impact what is below that. So, you know, you can say, well, best of all possible worlds, it'd be great to have this over here and be there for 6 months, but can we actually do that without having some kind of negative impact on the environment would be
Or a
one
way to
consider-
move
yeah.
it 10 feet.
Feed it over, yeah.
But we, you know, and the other thing we're talking about, taking it off the grid, but I mean, it's easier to say that than do it. So there's, you know, trying to figure out the logistics of that and what is realistic to do that to and what isn't.
And who's designing the tiny house, and it's gonna have sewage or composting toilet and water and power?
One of that's
We're
our,
looking at systems.
Yeah.
And looking at green systems. So
we're talking
water,
to
waste, waste,
Jermaine
power.
next month.
Water, waste, power.
And that would be in the dwelling, but not necessarily in the studio.
That's
It wouldn't be
correct,
in the studio.
yeah, the studio's just an empty,
And it's gonna
Yeah.
have
It will probably have electricity.
Yeah, we'll have electricity,
Solar
yeah.
power or something. But in addition to all of that, I guess what we're also, to further what you were talking about, Trevor, is what the value is of this place, this space, to the art community, the people who are using it and making work within it, as well as the public that they're engaging with. And I can see it working from everything from providing a place for somebody to kind of examine a community or a place as they're working towards building a public art project, for example, you know, a long-term commission of significant work. But to actually sit and be looking at the shore, looking at the city, looking back at the city, returning the city's gaze and understanding that place in a different way provides a different perspective. I think you can.
Oh, that's a good thing. I think just the opportunity to see Vancouver from the water and not from the land is unique. There's not, I don't think there's a residency that does that anywhere. So I mean, I think that alone is going to create its own interest.
there was the.
Oh, and how did you find Jeremy and Suze?
They were,
You.
yeah, they're, well,
You didn't, although I always knew them. I can't always do Germany anyway.
well, from knowing Jeremy's practice, I mean, Jeremy, I think I first met Jeremy when he was working on Liz Magar's Light Shed public art project. And he essentially built a 5/8 size version and was so meticulous, like even the nails had to be smaller. And so he built this wooden boat shed, smaller scale boat shed, and then each board was cast in aluminum. So that essentially is his project. So I met him then, and it was just his affection and passion and tenacity, I think, of the way in which he works, and a very high level work ethic, and a real desire and compassion for reusing material, that he lives and walks that talk. So they live on Maine, they have a place in Berlin and a place in Athens, and are just these really amazing, hardworking people. So they just seem like a perfect fit.
But we weren't asking them to do it.
No.
We were asking them to come and give us advice because they had built a whole bunch of stuff with heritage materials. And
But in retrospect, I think that if we had gone over to Maine, which Carol and I just did a little road trip over there to visit them there, and if we had seen that, we would have right away said, oh no, we want these people. Real desire and compassion for reusing material, that he lives and walks that talk. So they live on Maine, they have a place in Berlin and a place in Athens, and are just these really amazing, hardworking people. So they just seem like a perfect fit.
But we weren't asking them to do it.
No.
We were asking them to come and give us advice because they had built a whole bunch of stuff with heritage materials.
But in retrospect, I think that if we had gone over to Maine, which Carol and I just did a little road trip over there to visit them there, and if we had seen that, we would have right away said, oh no, we want these people to remediate the cabin, because if you see what they've done in the home that they're living in, and then the other projects that they've built on Maine, right, Carol? I mean, absolutely exquisite, all found in recycled materials, but done in such a sophisticated way. I mean, it's just it's incredible construction, really, and vision.
And so they came first just to talk to us about heritage materials, and then they saw the cabin, and then 2 weeks later they fell in love, and 2 weeks later we got a letter saying they had read over all the conservation reports and the heritage reports, and they were really interested to take it on. And I mean, they were crazy. Like, they moved here last June, and they worked from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, 7 days a week for that whole year.
And they wanted to live on site.
Yeah.
And they were really disappointed.
We couldn't get a trailer on site for them. So they were, and then there was limits to how much time they could work there. So they could only do it 12 hours a day, but they were, I mean, it was a huge amount of crazy, like, it was crazy time over there. And then, of course, they're remediating, and Jeremy's going out and sourcing the materials so that the wood they're replacing the floor with is the same age as the wood in the floor. Okay, so the only, I think, new material is that one beam that's here, that's part of the installation here, that Al had cut out because it had the
chimney,
the carpenter ants or the termites, and they couldn't find a piece of wood to replace that. So that's actually the only piece. That beam is the only new material that went back into the cabin. So everything else was done with wood that was the same age as the wood that was there.
Sorry.
I want to circle back to the residency for a second.
Sorry,
I'm just so curious what happened to the piano.
That's another tip.
Yeah.
That's working on that.
Oh,
They got the piano.
And so, what?
So Luke Blackstone has worked with Carol on several pieces.
Yeah.
And he was interested in saving the piano.
Okay.
And so that was offered to him, and so he came along and hoisted it. I don't know how we got it out there, because again, I know, but neither one of us were, none of us were there when this was actually moved, to our disappointment. But, so we didn't see the piano come out, and so I don't know whether you were there? So what happened, Carol?
I took the pictures.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know how to use the camera. He just handed it to me.
And where did he take it when he pulled it out?
Oh, and he had a truck and a trailer behind it. And the guy on that huge machine hoisted it over top the cabin and out of there, and gently placed it on the little trailer, flatbed trailer behind his truck, attached to his truck. And then the guy jumped out of his huge machine and he said, "I've never moved a piano before." And he ran over to the keyboard and he after you built the road in.
Right.
So I posted yesterday, they're on the Facebook page for Blue Cabin. There are a few shots of the piano being craned out and on the truck,
I think there's a
as
couple
Carol
around.
was saying. Are they there as well?
Yeah, I was always also there on the beach that day when they moved this thing, and the equipment was huge and heavy duty and a big deal. So my question was, do we know anything about when the cabin was originally moved there from Cole Harbour and placed there? How did
I think it was brought in by boat.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
But how did he get it up onto its?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Except they were all shipbuilders. I'm sure they moved bigger things than that. So
Carol, do you have any?
I think it was just common knowledge on the big shipbuildings, like there was huge equipment that could do a job like that, yeah.
Yeah, it could be just because they have equipment there that'll take a ship out of the water and for dry dock and stuff like that. So they need heavy duty cranes. What were you gonna ask?
Yeah, those guys are good at hydraulic winching. It's not that tough. I do think that talk about the residency is pretty important, and that's going to be a multi-year thing. Just a couple of quick opinions. Personally, I've been underwhelmed by the parks residencies that the CAG has run. Both members of the work and two last points. A protege of mine runs the Photo Island residencies. Can connect you with that anytime you want. But finally, you're going to have a wonderful period once it's on the floating thing. You have a wonderful time, and you should harvest it. You'll have 12 months where you can have a monthly cocktail party and charge $500 each. And if there's 20 people there, you will fill it. Exploit that, because the CAG, when it was on the CAG board, we did those, and we made more money from cocktail parties in new houses than anything. There's a market out there, so exploit that. It's only in that first year that you can do it, but be shameless in getting money out of it, because you'll need it.
And you could do an Airbnb.
Tell them on.
We were looking at FOCO, I think, in some ways, thinking about this, but I mean, we also were looking at, or I was looking at a lot of the work by Theaster Gates in Chicago. And it was like, but I mean, Theaster Gates is working in the poorest part of Chicago doing these amazing projects. Like, how do you take those ideas and bring it into one of the richest cities in the world? And that's what this is about in some ways. I mean, this is a lot of work. I mean, most of it free, but in terms of cash to do this, this is only the cost of a very small condo, like a really small condo. So the idea that, when you think of Vancouver, like, this is a big gargantuan effort, and there's a lot of volunteer hours, but in terms of just the money this costs, it's ridiculously cheap when you think how ridiculously expensive this is, So.
I have a comment. Somebody was asking about why they thought the project had garnered so much interest in the press, and I think for anyone that grew up here or that's lived here for a long time or that's interested in any way in our history, it captures the imagination.
Yeah.
In whatever your memory of it is, I remember as a kid I have these vague memories of all the waterfront, the Cole Harbour, the False Creek. I don't think I ever went to the North Shore, but Cole Harbour and False Creek, they were all these little shacks, and I remember it, but I was young enough that I doubt myself whether I really remember it. So when I see this, it recaptures that.
I mean, Dan Vaughn, our archivist, was saying it's got like this magic treehouse quality to it that you don't. Oh, it's just like the color. It's all those things. Yeah.
Well, thanks to you guys. It's happening. It's amazing. It's amazing. You're
Rousing ovation too.
Your fault.
It is your fault, Carol. Good job.
I was going to ask you about that.
What?
That's the second time you've accused me of
Oh,
this.
no.
Something wrong here.
I mean, Al's response was burn it down.
Oh, you yelled it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you yelled it out.
Yeah.
And trying to figure it out in a way that it was safe. I mean, once we had the initial publicity, I mean, how many times did it get broken into or you know, vandalism out there? Like, it was amazing how fast, once people knew it was there, what happened to it. So the idea of just having it somewhere as you know, as some kind of studio would have been a very, very difficult thing to do. You know, protecting it would not have been easy. So,
But that's what you're doing now?
yeah. But except, you know, you at least have to have a canoe to get to it. Not impossible. Does anybody else have questions? Yes, go on.
And it's more like a comment. I think what's really wonderful about what you've accomplished is you've modeled a set of values which future generations can say, you know, the heritage aspect, the history aspect, also the outlining what kind of ethical and value systems that you are making visible, I think, especially countering neoliberalism. So I think that's what, for me, takes this project into the future and what people are looking for in relation to what we're kind of stuck in contemporary Vancouver. So kudos for that.
Well, and I think the idea of a cultural project that mixes heritage and culture is not seen that often. It's not something new. So I think that makes it unique in many ways.
And even the value of salvage. So, you know, today people might be thinking, oh, there's like, you know, 50-year-old wood or 100-year-old wood in this house, we should actually say that.
Yeah.
Rather than caring about that.
Well, I mean, I don't know that any of us, we don't really think we own it. We just kind of, it's in trust. We have it in trust in some ways.
Caretaking.
Yeah, the slipperyness of
Yeah.
ownership.
Just
It's
like,
lovely. Like, that's what I like most about this project is that, you know, something can exist for 100 years without anybody really having any claim to it. And that's, in
Well-
Vancouver today, that's amazing.
well, like Al was the watchman, and so we're kind of continuing on in that tradition,
In addition to the blue house itself, there was a lot of other structures outside, like the deck, the decking, and there was a washroom, there was all sorts of artwork outside it. Did all of that just get left behind, or was that salvaged as well?
right? Well, Carol.
A lot of it got stolen.
Yeah. I think Carol saved a lot of what was in the interior. Remember?
Yeah.
I was thinking more the
Glenn
exterior.
knows about more than that.
I mean, the only thing we saved was the assemblages that were on the front of the
On the
house.
exterior, yeah.
Like you see there's two on either side. But Krista saved a bunch of stuff. I don't know what that is.
I think she has the boat for some
Does she?
reason. Yeah, I have a feeling she has.
Anyway, she saved, Krista, who gave a talk here with Carol a couple of weeks ago, she did wind up getting a lot of it, saving some of it. But there was a real reluctance by Carol and Al about saving any of it.
There was something I remember that Carol said right in the heart of all of that when we were trying to decide whether we should take or save any of those outdoor things, and that was that they were always intended to be evolving pieces, and that if we were to save it, they would be stuck in time. And so we just kind of, we just respected that and let them go.
Another question about the house. It's called the blue house, but three sides were blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, one side is white. So
Talk to Carol.
Yeah.
why was one side
Couldn't
left?
reach it.
Couldn't reach it to
To paint it.
paint
There's
it.
like a little gully there.
And it was really
And bramble.
So is the renovated version leaving one more white?
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
but it's going to be the inside wall. So you'll want to see it if you're on the outside walls will all be blue. Okay, anybody else have any
you have a seaweed gravel on that side. Just the two other projects, rare cases of cultural memory here. The George Kagawa House, a lot of us thought would never happen, et cetera. It's been saved, the physical structure's been saved, and the city is running some kind of residency there. I don't know much about it. We're right in the middle now of trying to do the same with Arthur Erickson Garden. All of his wonderful library, the interior, the furniture's got sold off. So the inside of the house is, you can never recoup it. But the garden itself is still there, a movement of float. But if you think of it, Arthur Erickson's garden, George Kagawa's house, and this would make a wonderful trio of, second half of 20th century creative arts in Vancouver. Thank God we got them. There's not much else.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, we're losing so much. I mean, we're losing so much heritage every year, and I think that's what makes this important. And what we're saving is a structure that's not the kind of heritage that gets saved. It's working class heritage, it's cultural heritage, it's kind of very humble heritage. And those aren't the stories that carry on. And this cabin has the ability to tell those stories. And I think that's what makes it really, really important that we did this. Although that's only after the fact. I wouldn't have said that before.
That's after writing this brand.
No, I'm just, I just wanted to write